Define tradition for me.
When scholars talk about tradition, the layperson is apt to misunderstand that. The layman, when he hears the word tradition, thinks of Fiddler on the Roof and thinks of tradition as a sort of blind, irrational following of certain practices the way it's always been. That's not what biblical scholars are talking about. What biblical scholars are talking about is pieces of information that have been memorized and handed down carefully from one person to another. And in oral cultures, especially, such as Jewish culture, the ability to memorize and pass on faithfully large tracts of sacred tradition accurately was a highly prized and highly developed skill that was inculcated in children right from their primary education on up through the rest of their lives. And it's these kinds of traditions that the scholars are after when they're looking for early sources about the life of Jesus.
Scholars say that 1 Corinthians 15, Paul passes on authoritative tradition, the message of the early Christians before the New Testament was even written. What is it? How do you know that?
The fact that Paul is quoting from a tradition that he himself received and then passed on in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5, is enormously significant because it means that this information does not date from AD 55 when Paul wrote the letter. Rather, it dates from the time of the original tradition itself, which scholars estimate to go back within the first 5 years after the crucifixion. And thus what we have here is an extremely early and valuable source of historical information. Now, the reason we know that this is tradition rather than Paul's own free composition is that he uses the technical rabbinical terms for handing on and receipt of sacred tradition in the letter. And also this tradition that he hands on is full of non-Pauline literary characteristics. It's written in a Semitic style, which goes right back to original Aramaic rather than Greek. And it's in a memorizable form that would make it easy to pass on to later generations. So scholars unanimously have recognized that what we have here in 1 Corinthians 15 is an extremely early tradition about the death, burial, resurrection, and appearances of Jesus.